Hello dear viewers, support me by subscribing to my channel and share my video if you like it, and also make sure you comment your thoughts. Now let's start the video. Willis, he wanted to pace, but that would not have been a good idea. His leg would not allow for it, not at the rate at which he wanted to pace. Anyway, he was still baffled as to what was going on. All he knew was that he needed to be both at Highgarden and somewhere north. It made no sense whatsoever, and made him also fear that he was losing his mind. Closing his eyes, he leant back on the stone bench that he'd been perched on for the past 10 minutes, after limping around the courtyard until his leg hurt too much to bear any more. Why here, what was it about this place, this small old courtyard with the weathered statue of Garth Greenhand, set next to the oldest part of Highgarden, and of course the weirwood tree. The old tree with the faded face carved into it. Hearing the clack of a cane, he looked up and then smiled slightly as his grandmother entered the courtyard. "I should have known that you'd be here," she humphed after a long moment. "You feel it too, don't you?" He looked at her, slightly confused. "Feel what, grandmother?" The end of the stick was suddenly right under his nose, for an instant. "Don't you start sounding like your idiot of a father all of a sudden." She glared at him before sitting on a bench by the weirwood tree. When she spoke again, it was more softly. "You feel the need to be here, in this place, don't you? And the pull north, don't deny it, Willis. I see it in your face. I cannot explain it, other than it must be a remainder of the first men blood that flows through us both. And last night I dreamt a dream, such a dream that I have never had before. Garth Greenhand himself was talking to me, but as if from far away, I could not hear a word. But his face..." Willis stared at his grandmother in shock, as she visibly pulled herself together. "But what does this mean?" She shrugged. "I know not, but I do know that something is happening. I can feel it in the air. So it seems can the Florence. Your fool of a father is complaining about them now. Something about sending a raven to Winterfell, and then there is the little matter of the raven from the Citadel, claiming that the glass candles can be relit. Your father laughed at the message." "I did not." Willis thought this over for a long moment. "Magic has returned then," he said musingly. "But why? And what must we do here?" Another shrug. "What do you feel?" "I need to walk," he replied, bowed respectfully to her, which bought him a thoughtful nod of acknowledgement, and then he left. Down the old bower path, around the corner to the Gate of Thorns, and then around again to the old gate. But the pull was taking him in the other direction now, and he turned and retraced part of his path, before descending a short flight of ancient steps and walking past the spring wall. Legend had it that once there had been a little spring somewhere in the area, and indeed there was an old and faded channel that issued from one ivy-clad wall, but that had not flowed in centuries. And so, following his feet and his senses, he found himself back in the little courtyard. Grandmother was still there, and she looked at him with narrowed eyes, as he limped back in. He closed his eyes and concentrated. "I am here. What must I do?" He could not explain why he thought those words, or who he thought them to. He just thought them. Something creaked to one side, and he opened his eyes and looked at the heartwood tree. This had been a godswood once, a long time ago. Obeying some feeling that he could not explain, he reached out and placed a hand on the tree. Nothing. And then he placed it on the carving of the face. Death, fire, blood, despair. He jerked back. The smell of char and destruction had filled his nose for a moment, and then the scent of the trees and the flowers had driven it away. "Willis?" His grandmother was on her feet and was staring at him. "What is it, boy?" I am not sure." And then he put his hand back to the same spot on the trunk. No. This was a nightmare. The sky was filled with death. It was the dragons, the Larian. The Black Dread was overhead, incinerating scores of his soldiers. There was fire everywhere. Fire and death and scorched remains. His host was breaking. His sons were dead. The Lannisters were either dead or running. This was death and ruin. His sons were dead. Oh, why had he brought them to this terrible place? His pride, his foolish, terrible pride. He was going to die. He knew that now. The next pass would kill him, and so much would die with him. The knowledge of the Gardener Kings, the secrets passed down by his ancestors. Things that no one else knew. He could hear the flap of those terrible wings, and he instinctively reached for the little weirwood pendant that his father had handed down to him. Gods of my ancestors, he thought, taking refuge in the old ways for the last moments of his life. The old gods, allow me one boon, one gift. Let one of my family know. Let the garden bloom again. When the Starks sent the call, let the garden bloom again. What did the words mean? Explain to them. He pulled the pendant off his neck, snapping the chain, and then he hurriedly stuffed it into the stone bottle of wine at his side, before hugging it close to him. Perhaps it might survive. And then the fire struck, and he opened his mouth to scream for an instant, before the darkness fell. Willis fell to his knees and screamed, and then a mist seemed to fall over his eyes, a veil. He watched himself stand stiffly and then walk out of the courtyard, his legs suddenly obeying him. Grandmother was hobbling after him, calling out worried questions as others arrived, drawn by his scream, but he strode on without acknowledging them. Down the path, down to the spring wall. There, where the old channel came out of the ivy-covered wall, he stopped, drew a dagger, cut the ivy. That was important. He had to cut it back. The stuff was old and thick, woody tendrils that snaked everywhere, but he hacked it back at the spot where the old channel met the wall. Others to each side helped him as a babble of baffled voices filled the air, but he ignored them all. And then he saw the bricked-up doorway. It was old, weathered, and scarred by the roots of the ivy. It must be broken down. He didn't recognize his own voice. Bring me a hammer. The veil before his eyes deepened for an instant, and he swayed slightly, and then a gardener was pressing a rough two-handed hammer into his hand. He hefted it for an instant, and then he swung. The bricks splintered, and then he swung again, and again, and again. Bricks shattered and fell down, and then he saw the blackness on the other side. More hammers suddenly appeared as others helped to open the doorway. He swung once, twice, 3 times more, and then the doorway was clear. Willis, it was his grandmother. You have brought us to this place. You must enter it. Still acting under this strange compulsion, with this veil over his mind, he stepped in. It was a room, about 30 feet deep and 30 across, with the channel ending at the base of the opposite wall. And there was a statue next to it, barely lit by the light coming through the doorway. He recognized it. Garth Greenhand, with one hand outstretched. At his feet was a shriveled bunch of flowers and a small wooden pendant with a chain attached. And as he looked at it, he remembered the battlefield that he had seen, and so he reached down and picked up the pendant, before placing it in the hand of the statue. He could hear the voice of his father now, behind him, and his grandmother as she barked something acerbically at her son. The veil was fading fast now, and he was starting to shake with tiredness. What was this? What was affecting him? And then the hand of the statue seemed to close around the pendant, as stone eyes opened with red fire. Someone screamed behind him, and then 3 things happened. He heard a great voice shout, "Let the garden bloom again. Send help to the Stark in Winterfell." He heard the sudden gurgle as water suddenly started to flow from the spring that must have been behind the wall. And then he felt something happen to his leg as pieces seemed to realign. He had just enough time to scream in agony before he blacked out from the pain. Jon Arryn. Stannis Baratheon had a remarkably fine Myrish spyglass, and he was using it now and looking at the ships in Blackwater Bay. After a moment he grunted in surprise and then snapped it shut. "Aye, he has returned," he muttered in a low voice that was barely loud enough to hear. "And he's worried enough that he's used smuggler's tricks to make his ship look different. He's stepped his topmasts a little differently and he's using different color sails. Looks more like an old scow from Bravos now. Then he is worried about being recognized by someone in King's Landing," Jon muttered, before looking about carefully. That was the problem with the Red Keep. You never knew who was watching who. There might be 6 eyes on them right now. "Lead on." Stannis nodded shortly, and then led him down a short path to a flight of stairs, where they found a small group of men in Baratheon livery, all of whom looked as if they had been through the school of hard knocks before going to sea. A lot, by the fact that one of them bore a close resemblance to Seaworth. If far younger, he could guess that they in the presence of one of the Onion Knight's sons. "Where?" Stannis asked quietly. "The old path," the boy replied, before leading them off down another set of stairs that snaked downwards. "Davin Seaworth," Stannis muttered to Jon as they pattered down the stairs. "Squire to me." They kept heading downwards, by stairs and passageways that Jon had never seen before in his life. "Who found this passage?" he panted after a while, conscious that his legs were starting to complain. My father, my lord hand, Devon Seaworth called up softly, but I pray that you keep silent, if you please. There are other passageways and tunnels throughout this place, and not all of them are known, by us at least. And we know that the spider has his own paths, though these places 'tis best to pass through in silence, lest we attract attention. This was a good point, and he nodded in acknowledgement before concentrating on where to put his feet. Down and down they went, their way now lit by lanterns with cunning faces that revealed just a little light, and which provoked a snort of amusement from Stannis. Smuggler's lanterns unless he missed his guess. Down again, until his feet wanted to fall off his legs, and then, mercifully, a level section. And then suddenly, he could see light ahead, and smell the sea, and hear waves. He walked forwards and then blinked, as a little jetty came into view, cunningly hidden behind rocks at the entrance. My lords, my father will be here soon. My men and I will guard the tunnels. Please do not raise your voices too loudly. We do not know who else has been here recently. The young Seaworth held up a small piece of wood, something from a wooden chest. Unless I miss my guess, someone has been here in the past month. We will guard. As the men walked back to the tunnel, Jon looked at Stannis. You have good men in the Seaworths. Aye, Stannis replied as he stared at the entrance. And I wish that I had more of such men. Jon sighed a little and then sat upon a handy rock. This was a secret place for secret deeds. He wondered how Seaworth had discovered it, and then he wondered who had built it. And of course, who used it now? Varys? Probably. The spider knew so very many things. Secret places. And then he heard the sound of oars. No, wait, an oar. A shadow appeared on a rock, and then a small dinghy waggled its way into view. A man in a cape and hood was sculling it into the cave with the swift, sure strokes of a man who knew how to use an oar. As he entered the cave, Jon placed a hand on his dagger, just in case, but then relaxed as the man in the boat pulled down his hood. Yes, Seaworth. The former smuggler navigated his way to the jetty, moored the small craft quickly, and then leapt ashore. My lord hand, he greeted Jon, before bowing to Stannis. My lord. Welcome back, Ser Davos, Stannis said quietly. We had word of your safe arrival in White Harbor. Why then this sudden need for secrecy? Because of what happened on the voyage to White Harbor, my lord, Ser Davos said just as quietly. My lord hand, there was a failed attempt at abducting your son. Shock roiled through him. What? By who? A man named Mikan, who joined here in King's Landing just before we left. My lord hand, we left under such conditions of secrecy that I would have thought that no one could have learnt of the departure of your son. But someone indeed found out. Someone talked. And now shock was replaced with rage. Indeed. And I will have their head. He closed his eyes for a moment to repress the rage. The attempt had failed. Robert had made it to White Harbor, and Lord Manderley had sent him north to Winterfell with a strong guard. Hopefully a raven was winging its way south from Ned to tell him of the successful arrival of the party. Go on. The man Mikan is on my ship, under close guard, and while he knows not how someone knew that your son was being taken north, he does know who gave him his orders. There was something in the voice of the Onion Knight, something that made him pause for thought. Who was it? The Master of Coin, Lord Petyr Baelish. The shock was so great that he took an involuntary step back, his legs shaking. What? I'm afraid that you heard me correctly, my lord hand. 'Twas Lord Petyr Baelish who gave this man the command. He disabled the chain pump and planned for the ship to lose an anchor, which would have forced me to seek the nearest port. Well, that would have been in the Fingers, where he then planned to set a fire on the ship, to knife Lord Stark's man, and then escape in the confusion with your son. This made no sense. No sense at all. There had to be a mistake somewhere in that line of thinking. Surely such a thing could not be possible. But he is one of my bannermen. Not a major lord, but he is of the Vale. He has sworn allegiance to me. And yet he spreads coin in this city, and buys influence, working towards something. Stannis said heavily, my lord hand, Baelish is a man who I have never trusted. There is much about him that is false. But still, this is beyond belief. There must be a reason for this. We must question this Mikan. My lord, here is his full confession, Seaworth said, holding out a letter. As written down by Lord Manderley, who was most angry to hear of this plot, and witnessed by myself and Lord Manderley's son, and as this Mikon pointed out to me, if he is placed in a black cell, then he will die with a few hours. He said that Lord Baelish has eyes everywhere, paid with by good coin, and soft threats. John felt his skin crawl for a long moment. Perhaps then this Mikon must be kept somewhere safer. Dragonstone, perhaps? Aye, Stannis said after a long moment. I agree, my Lord Hand. Ser Davos, do you need to provision your ship, or can you sail there on the tide? We have enough to get there, my lord. Good, said Stannis, and then he frowned. By the look on your face, there is something else. What is it? Ser Davos cleared his throat slightly. My lords, there is indeed something else. Another plot, a murkier one, was discovered at White Harbor. Don stared at the former smuggler again. A plot against who? Your son again. When we discovered the plan to abduct him, I doubled the guards on your son on board my ship. In the process, some of his medicine was knocked over and ruined. When we got to White Harbor, I took the rest, along with your son's nurse, to an apothecary that I know there, one Barlin by name, so that we could obtain more. But when he examined it, he said that it was not medicine, but instead a form of poison, something to weaken the lad and make him dependent on it, and that it caused fits of shaking. So great was his horror, that Jon's legs nearly gave out beneath him, and Stannis and Ser Davos had to escort him to a low rock to sit, whilst he collected his scattered wits. Poison? He eventually gasped. Someone has been poisoning my son, my heir, my little boy. Aye, my lord, Ser Davos said gruffly. I told Lord Manderley, all, here is his letter, and he handed over another letter. He delivered it to me just before we sailed. A copy has also gone to Lord Stark in Winterfell. The good news is that, by lessening the dosage of the powder every day, it is possible to wean your son off it, and just such a process had started when I last saw him. By the time he gets to Winterfell, if he is not there already by now, he should be free of it. Jon opened the letter, hurriedly, brought it close to his face and then read hurriedly. Yes, yes, by all the gods, old and new, it was true. He saw how his hands shook as he lowered the letter and then saw the look of sympathy that both men were giving him. Ser Davos openly and Stannis in the form of various facial tics. My son will indeed recover, he said weakly. And then the rage came back. Who could have done such a thing? To poison a child? My Lord Hand. Ser Davos said quietly, where did your lady wife get this medicine from? He opened his mouth to reply, and then he paused. Lysa, he said after a long and stunned moment. My lady wife said that she was given it by a maester that she consulted. Did you ever talk to this maester? What was his name? Ser Davos asked shrewdly. Speaking as a father myself, my lord, I have every wish to help you to get to the bottom of this matter. He thought about it for a long moment, his wits all over the place. Nay, he said slowly. Lysa never mentioned who he was, just that the medicine would help, and then various horrible suspicions raised themselves in his mind. Wait. Lysa knew Baelish. They were always close when they were children, as he was brought up at Riverrun. Their fathers knew each other. What if she got it from him? What if this too is a part of whatever plan he has made? And then something truly terrible entered his mind. She was frantic when I told her that young Robert was going to be fostered in Winterfell. Angry beyond belief, almost mad with anger. But then she calmed down, after I bade Daenerys talk to her in an effort to calm her down. Why? What did he say to her? If he was plotting to abduct my son, then... No, this cannot be. The other two men looked at each other and then fell silent, as Jon put the pieces together in his head and came to a conclusion that he did not like. It seems, he said, in a calm but brittle voice, that I cannot trust my wife on this matter. Not until I have talked to her. As for Baelish, well, he belongs in a black cell, guarded by men that I trust absolutely. And then I can question him about what he knows. Ser Davos, you have my deepest gratitude in this. Your devotion to duty and your discretion are most appreciated. You will have a suitable reward. The former smuggler flushed slightly, and then bobbed his head in salute. I have but done my duty, my Lord Hand. I could do naught else. Now, if you will excuse me, my lords, I must get back to my ship and make for Dragonstone. Safe passage, Stannis said, and then they both watched the man leave the way that he had arrived. Lord Baratheon, Jon said heavily after a long moment, Given the great matter that we have been looking at, I have had an unpleasant thought. Should anything happen to me before it comes to a conclusion and before I can ascertain what has been happening within my own household, I think that I must need to place a codicil in my will. You are a man of some legal substance, I am told. Will you witness it? I mean to place my son more fully in the hands of my good brother and his wife, should the worst happen. Until I know better, I cannot trust my wife. Stannis nodded shortly. I will, my Lord Hand. Which just left a long trudge back up the stairs. Fortunately, Devon Seaworth could see that he was tired and had them pause more frequently on the journey upwards, until they finally reached the Red Keep. Once the matter of the codicil was completed in a small side room, and Stannis Baratheon had left with his men, Jon walked tiredly back to the Tower of the Hand, where his men greeted him with concerned looks. Some food and wine, he told Quill after the man had asked if he needed anything. He waited in the topmost room as he waited for it to be brought to him, his mind astir with worry and conjecture. So, he was dancing on the edge of a narrower blade than he could ever have imagined. Peril now lay to every side, but his son was safe. That much was certain. Now, who could he trust? Truly trust? Because the stakes were now so very high. When Quill slipped in with a plate of roast chicken and a small flask of wine, he nodded his thanks and then raised a finger for the man to pause. After he had swallowed a bite of chicken and a gulp of wine, he wiped his mouth and then beckoned for the man to approach. I need the services of a man who can be devious and, if need be, very violent, he whispered. A man who, when bought, stays bought, by me at least, someone intelligent, who knows that the hand of the king can deliver far more than a man, no matter how rich, on the run. Do you know of any such man? Quill, who had raised his eyebrows briefly during this, showing how surprised he was, paused for a moment and then frowned. I believe that I might just know of such a man, he said eventually. He is a sellsword and he has done some work for many people on many things, without saying much about it. Given a sufficient incentive, he can be trusted. I like him not, but he has his talents. Is he in King's Landing? Not too far from it. I believe that he has just finished a job killing bandits just to the south. Excellent. Bring him to me. What is his name? Bronn, my Lord Hand. Nada. I bid thee farewell, Lord Stark. I will talk to the Lord Commander when I get back to Castle Black, especially about sending a party to the Night Fort. But above all, I will send word about your brother's quest north of the Wall, and of course of any other developments. Maester Aemon then bowed stiffly in his saddle. Thank you, Maester Aemon. I wish you a safe trip back to Castle Black, and I will send word of any other news that reaches us here. Winterfell stands with Castle Black. No, the North stands with Castle Black. The old man nodded. And I believe that I shall be one of the first men of the Night's Watch to witness the results of your new portage scheme up the Long Lake. It is an intriguing idea. Yes, it was an intriguing idea, and ironically it had come from something that Theon Greyjoy had said in passing to him. Assembling the boats would be the tricky bit, but once that was done, they could start to send a lot more north without overtaxing the King's Road to the Wall, which was still being repaired in places. It wasn't a complete solution. The Long Lake didn't go all the way up to the Wall, but it meant that more supplies could be sent north in greater amounts. Of course, there was also the little question of getting the supplies further north from there, but, well, he had some good men working on it. He turned his thoughts back to Maester Aemon, who seemed to be doing some thinking of his own. I shall also send word from Castle Black as soon as I have talked to the Lord Commander, the old man muttered, before smiling slightly. Who would have thought that at my age, I would witness such an adventure? Ned laughed softly at this, and then sobered a little. Give me your hand, Maester Aemon. The old man extended an age-spotted hand and Ned grasped it firmly. May the old gods grant you safe and swift passage back to the Wall. You of all people know of the task that we face. My thanks, Lord Stark. May both the old gods and the new look over you here at Winterfell. There is so much at stake. And then he looked ahead of him. Lead on, he called, and then the line of men and horses started through the gates of Winterfell, heading north. The old maester of Castle Black rode awkwardly, but with a look of grim determination on his face. As the last of them left, and the gates closed, Ned looked to one side, where Jon was standing, his face thoughtful. Jon, father. The young man who he had protected for so long smiled slightly. Before you ask, I said my farewells to Maester Aemon earlier. He promised to send word and asked that I do the same. Aye, he's a good man. John nodded, seemed about to say one thing, and then seemed to switch to something else. I still can't believe that he's a Targaryen. He goes against everything I heard about them. Ned eyed him carefully. Never judge a family by a few members, he pointed out. Arias was not always the man that he ended up as. Boots scuffed to one side and they both looked over to see Demeric Bolton approaching them. The son of the Lord of the Dreadfort had been very quiet of late, obviously mulling what he had learnt. And now he looked as if that conversation that had been put off once before was about to finally happen. Lord Stark, may I speak with you in private? The young Bolton looked distinctly young and awkward and pink-cheeked. Ned looked at John for a moment, who was somehow both smiling and glowering at Bolton. Of course, Demeric. Walk with me. John, you should return to your training. John stomped off muttering and Ned led Demeric towards the Godswood. I suspect that I already know the answer to this question, but what would you like to talk about? Demeric paused for a moment, as he seemed to be having trouble with his breathing, before swallowing hugely and then opening his mouth. Lord Stark, I would like to thank you for your hospitality over these many weeks. You have made me most welcome here at Winterfell. I was trying to keep you alive and away from your mad half-brother who is now thankfully very dead. Ned thought but did not say out loud. Instead he nodded. Your help here has been invaluable, he replied. Instead, which was perfectly true. Things have been interesting. Demeric muttered. The others, well, on behalf of my father, you know that House Bolton stands with you. Then he coughed slightly. I have enjoyed my time here, and I have been much honored at meeting your family. Lady Stark has been most appreciative, and your son Robert is a good friend. But there is someone else in your household who has caught my respectful attention, and with your permission, I would like to speak of her to you. They had arrived by the Heart Tree by now, and Ned looked at the young man in front of him. You are referring to my daughter, Sansa. Demeric somehow went even paler, and then looked even more resolute, as if such a thing was possible. Lord Stark, I would be honored if I could be considered for the hand of your daughter Sansa. Ned looked at him through slightly narrowed eyes, and did his best to mirror the look at his own father, used to direct at people. The look that once caused one minor lord to actually piss himself. Judging by the way that Demeric swayed slightly and then somehow straightened even further, as if he had replaced his spine with a spear, he had at least the basics of the look. You think that you are worthy of my daughter? Demeric opened his mouth for a moment, flushed slightly, and then rallied a little. I would battle to be worthy of her, he replied simply. I would strive every day to be worthy of her. This was an answer that he had expected from a man who had been fostered at the Red Fort, and it was so unlike anything that Rose Bolton would have said, that he nodded slightly. Well said, Ned muttered. Well said. I must ask this of you, though. Does this come from you or your father? The young man swallowed jerkily. My father urged me to press my suit, Lord Stark, but this request comes from me. I know that Starks and Boltons have not always been allies in the North, but given the threat to the wall and the need for us to unite behind you against the others, I think that closer ties between our houses would be a good idea. Ned clasped his hands behind his back and then stared at the Heart Tree. I shall discuss this with Lady Stark and also with my daughter, Demeric. This is not a decision that can be made quickly. Thank you, Lord Stark, and I would heartily agree with you. I would not want this to be decided in haste. Another point in favor of the lad. Very well, thank you for your candor, Demeric. I will consider it most carefully. Demeric nodded, turned to leave, and then suddenly turned back. One last thing, if I may, Lord Stark. Ned nodded slightly. The heir to the Dreadfort looked at him with eyes that burned with determination. I am not my father, Lord Stark, and I am most assuredly not the creature that I am told my half-brother was. Ned smiled slightly. I know that, Demeric, if you had been anything like the thing that Ramsay Snow was, you'd be on your way back to the Dreadfort by now. Perhaps even with your head still atop your shoulders. Thank you, lad. Demeric nodded a little and then bowed respectfully, turned and left. Ned watched him go carefully. Yes, the name Bolton was one that had been feared once, and he had his own quiet suspicions about Rose Bolton. Something still did not feel right about things around the Dreadfort, but his son was someone very different. Well, he had a lot to think about. Perhaps a chat with Cat, a word with Sansa, and then a raven to the Dreadfort. In the meantime, the North had to be run, and he strode off to his solar with his usual list in his head. More ravens had arrived from remote areas of the north, promising aid and fealty to the Stark in Winterfell. Messages had even arrived from the Brackens and the Blackwoods, and he winced at what his good father would probably have to say about two of his houses sending such a message to Winterfell. As he strode down the corridor, a throat cleared itself as he passed a side passage and a voice called out, "Lord Stark, I presume." It was a northern voice, a rough voice, one with power in it. "I am Lord Stark," he replied, and peered at the man who was walking slowly towards him. He was in dark robes that looked travel-stained, and had a long face framed by graying hair. He also looked familiar. "Wait, I know you don't. We have met long ago. I once rode as escort to Lord Commander Cordeal, when he came south to meet you." Ned looked long and hard at the man, and then something clicked in his mind. "You are Mance Rayder?" "I am." "Why are you here?" "I must talk to you about what's happening north of the wall. At once." He looked at the man who others called the King Beyond the Wall, and then nodded. "Join me in my solar." Then he stared at the parchment and then wondered how he was going to ask his uncle all the questions that he dared to. It would not be easy, he felt, as if someone had stuffed his head with straw at the moment. He was not sleeping well at all. He would wake at least once a night, with a cry of fear from a nightmare. He could never remember the dreams, but he knew that they were related to that boat, and his dead brothers, and that terrible shore. What had that figure been? Who had it been? His eyes returned to the letter. All the news here in Winterfell was about the discoveries that had been made so far, all the old artifacts and documents, and all the holes that lay in them, sometimes literally. Lord Stark was doing his best to pull it all together, but he did not envy the man. He admired him greatly now, but he would rather not be him. The Stark in Winterfell had so much weight on his shoulders, which was why he was writing to his uncle Roderick. Roderick the Reader was the only person he could think of in the Iron Islands with as open a mind as possible, and who might, just might, have research as well that might help. He wished that he knew his uncle better. He wished that he knew how to best appeal to his uncle. Had his uncle heard the voice? His father, he had an instinctive feeling that if his father had heard the voice, had heard the call to aid Winterfell, but that he would be doing his best to ignore it. The old way. His father was wedded to it. His father had made his stand on the Iron Islands based on it. His father was a stubborn fool. He knew that now. The war had been a disaster. As for Uncle Damfair, no, he'd just get a curse back in return, if anything at all. So here he was, writing a letter to an uncle he barely remembered, to help a people he barely remembered to help in turn. Winterfell, he had to do this. He had to write it. He didn't know why exactly, but the dreams were behind this. He knew that much. So he bent over the letter again and kept writing. Ned. As he led the former Night's Watchman into his solar and closed the door, Ned found his mind racing at a great rate. Why was Mance Rayder here? If he meant him any ill will, surely he would have tried to stab him by now. Instead, he stood by the great table and stared at the huge amount of reading matter there, with a frown on his face. Your research on the others? Ned nodded. Very impressive. Ned gestured to a chair to one side, before pausing and walking over to a side table. This was a gamble, but one that needed to be taken. He poured a glass of wine for himself, and then one for Rayder, before tearing off a hunk of bread from the loaf that must have been brought to his room recently. Digging around at the back of the table, he discovered some salt in a little stone jar, and he then carried wine, bread, and jar over to Rayder, before returning for his own wine. As he sat in his own chair, he watched as Rayder stared at the offering, before what must have been some carefully concealed tension leaked out of him. "My thanks," said the King Beyond the Wall, as he tore off some bread, sprinkled some salt on it, and then bit a chunk off it, before sipping some wine. "Given who you are and what it must have taken to get you here, I thought that an offering of guest rights was important." The other man smiled quickly, and kept eating. As he did, Ned sat back and studied him. Mance Rayder was no longer a young man, but whilst he had graying hair, his eyes were still very lively and had a lot of laughter lines around them. He wore traveling clothes and riding boots, so he must have ridden south, and Ned found himself wondering how he had gotten to Winterfell. As Rayder ate the last of the salted bread and then drank some wine, he also leant back and regarded Ned carefully. "Well, Lord Stark, I will not waste your time by beating about the bush. The others are coming, but then you know that, don't you? I was coming south anyway, after hearing word that you were looking for evidence of the others, and then I heard that damn voice in my head. saying that the others come again and that the Stark in Winterfell needs help. Damn near wet myself, so I came south even faster, because you know that the others have returned. There was a certain amount of relief in his voice, and Ned looked at him closely. I do, and your presence makes things easier for me. I was going to go to the Wall soon to try and get word of you. News that there is another king beyond the Wall spread fast, as did word of your increasing raids. Raider raised a languid hand. I have sent word for them to stop at once. Of course I cannot say that they will all stop. The free folk are, well, free. You think of the title of king, and you think of your friend Robert Baratheon. I merely have influence. They follow me because I have a plan, and because we are desperate. When did the others return? The other man shook his head. That is a very hard question to answer. Some of their creatures never left, and with the free folk so scattered, I will tell you what I know. You have a map of the north over there. I see. We should look at it. Ned sipped at his own wine, and then stood. As they walked over to the map, which was parchment tacked to a board, he could sense Raider's eyes looking over everything in the room. When they both stood before the map, Raider smiled slightly at the area north of the wall. I see that your map is lacking in a few details, he said in a grim but almost cheerful voice. May I add to it? Ned nodded, and Raider looked about and then grabbed a quill and a little pot of ink. This river here goes northwards, into the valley of the Fen. What lies beyond the Frost Fangs to the west is a mystery, but to the north of the haunted forest, and the Fen lies, he sketched a number of lakes, and then a mountain range. The quill shook a little as he drew a long mountainous ridge that looked familiar. What's that? Ned asked slowly. It has many names, Raider said, as he put the quill down and carefully stoppered the ink pot with hands that shook a little. Some call it Death Ridge, others Winter's Heart. Depends on the tribe you see, but most call it Hope Morn. There was a time, when I was a lad, when you could go north and see it, from a distance at least. These days, if you go north to look upon it, you don't return. Don't return alive, that is. His eyes seemed to go somewhere else for a moment, and Ned recognized the look of a man viewing memories that he didn't want. And then Raider shook his head a little and smiled bleakly. We know nothing about where they come from. Not originally, the lands of always winter are harsh and terrible, even for the lands beyond the wall, but Hopenor is where they have always been associated with, since the building of the wall. And it has always been guarded. There are ruins there, they say. Who built them? No one knows. We know that the first men built the Fist of the First Men. Sad ruin that it is now. But Hopenor, he shook his head. Men always tended to vanish there if they strayed too close to it. An evil place. Ned swallowed thickly as he remembered the vision that he had had when the Heartstone had been placed in his hand. A long mountain like a ridge, with ruins on it, and guardians that were not human. Raider was looking at him oddly. How can you know of it? Ned ran a trembling hand over his face for a moment. A vision from, I think, the old gods, when the Heartstone was returned here from the last hearth. I saw it then, Raider. I saw the mountain, and the great hall within it. There was a mockery of a heart tree, and things that had once been men to the sides, and a dais, and a throne, and a creature on that throne that had white skin and blue eyes like stars. The king beyond the wall went white as a sheet. What was it? From what I said after my vision brought me back here, it was the Night's King. The real one, not the twisted thing that legend said once held power at the Night Fort. This was something else, something terrible, something evil beyond words. He shook his head again. So, yes, I know what we face. I might not have laid eyes on a white, but I know the threat from the far north. Raider looked at him for a long moment, and then little more tension seemed to leave his face. Good. You share the burden then, he muttered, before turning back to the map. The first villages vanished more than a year ago. Little places far to the north. A handful of the free folk here, a handful more there. His finger traced a rough line, and then it got worse. Worse quickly. We of the free folk have always burnt our dead. Suddenly we needed two. Whites. Just a handful at first, to match the numbers of people vanishing, but then they started to grow, and then the sightings started. Sightings? The others. White Walkers some call them, but the others. Places grow cold, quickly. The white cold, they call it. And then they come, white hair, white blue skin, swords that will cut through any steel. Nothing kills them. Fire can drive them away. Raider's finger traced a line down the map. They have been coming south. We cannot stop them. We cannot touch them. We cannot tell them. Nodded slowly and then walked back to the table, where he poured more wine. You mentioned that the wildlings, the free folk you call them, followed you because you had a plan. What is it? There was a pause as Raider rubbed a hand over his chin and then strode over to join him. My plan died the moment that I heard the voice announce that the others had returned, and that you needed help here, he said slowly. Which is why I hurried south. Lord Stark, what do you know of the early history of the Wall? Just that it was built to stop the others, Ned said with a frown. At the end of the Age of Heroes. Raider said with an ironic smile. How you of the South forget, he paused, licked his lips, and then looked at Ned. The free folk remember what the Night's Watch have forgotten. The wall was built in the one place where it could both last the summers and also use the land the best, the shortest and most defensible stretch. It cut off many of the free folk, but that was all right. Tower think that there must have been a plan. The free folk were the scouts for the men manning the wall. The Night's Watch patrolled the wall, maintained it, and acted as a defensive force. And when the others came again, the Stark in Winterfell would call the banners and lead the real force to defend the wall. But when the others vanished, it all went awry. The Night's Watch changed. It had little to do, other than maintain the castles. Commanders died, other men came in, memories faded with time. The Watch started viewing the free folk as a threat. Of course it takes two to make a quarrel. It wouldn't have taken too much to get the hotter heads amongst the free folk to bid back. And there you have it. Too much time with no threat from the others. Too much familiarity between Night's Watch and free folk. Ned stared at the man wryly. Do your people really have such long memories? A shrug. In places, tales get told and changed a little. But once you compare a dozen of them, you can see a common thread. Besides, there are inscriptions in the lands beyond the wall. Runes. The men of Fen still speak the old tongue, the language of the first men. Learn the tongue, and you can read the runes. There's a cave near the Fist of the First Men, Lord Stark. It's a shame that you don't know of it, because there's an inscription on one wall that says Usse agreement witnessed by you Stark of Winterfell. There was a short silence. Agreement? Something to do with the wall. Part of it is lost. Ned sighed. I know nothing of it. But then we are still going through the documents discovered here in Winterfell. He caught sight of Raider's raised eyebrows and explained. There is a room near here that I knew nothing of until recently. My father did, though, and possibly my brother. A room filled with documents about the old times, about the others. A room that had objects, one of which I used without knowing it to send the call to those who seemed to have the blood of the first men. And a room that contained, well, I shall mention it later. Raider's eyebrows remained raised. You knew nothing of it, at all? He choked the words out and seemed to be having trouble breathing. How could the Stark in Winterfell not? And then he sank back in the chair that he had half risen from. You were fostered in the Vale, and Aerys murdered your father and your brother when you were still young. No wonder he was king beyond the wall. Ned nodded somberly before standing and walking to the great box. This was also in it, he said as he lifted the great mace within it. The Fist of Winter. Raider stood the moment that he saw the weapon, his face very pale again, and his eyes glittering with what seemed like unshed tears. You know, there's a saying amongst the Thin, he said slowly, who call themselves the last of the first men. They say that the only time they'll ever leave their valley is when the Stark wields the Fist of Winter again. And the way they say it, it is as if they don't believe it will ever happen. You asked about my plan, Lord Stark. I need to bring the free folk south of the wall. I feared that only we knew about the others, that by the time that the Night's Watch could be persuaded about the danger too many of the free folk would be dead, or worse, that I could somehow force a way south, settle the gift, and the new gift, and then persuade the stubborn fools in Castle Black that I could help defend the wall. He looked at Ned and then at the mace again. When the call came, I knew that I had to talk to you at once, that you knew that they were coming, that you could help us. Do you know how to kill them? Ned nodded at the table to one side with the obsidian arrowheads. Obsidian, or dragon glass as some call it. The unshed tears started to spill down Raider's face as he screwed his eyes shut for a long moment before opening them again. The free folk are so called because we did not bend the knee. Will not bend the knee. but I know when to ask for help, and when to do what must be done. Slowly, reluctantly, but determinedly he knelt. Lord Stark, the Stark in Winterfell, help me save my people from what the night brings. Stand, Ned urged. I would not have a proud man beg me to do what is right. Stand and help me, and tell me how I can help you. Reader stood and then bowed his head in a slow salute. Thank you, Lord Stark. I will not forget your kindness, he muttered. And then he laid a hand on the head of the mace. I would swear an oath on this. And then they both heard the crash of thunder overhead. Doran. His brother was standing there, staring at the message in his hand as if it represented a personal affront to him, and Doran sighed to himself a little as he brought his wheeled chair to a halt. Normally he would get someone to push him, preferably Oberyn when he was around, but only close family. He did so hate this weakness, this pain in his feet. After a long moment, Oberyn finally surfaced and noticed him. Your pardon, my brother, he said in a distracted voice. I was thinking about the message I have received from the Citadel. The news is true. The glass candles can be relayed. Magic has returned to these lands. Doran nodded slowly. And what are your thoughts about the impact of this? There was a pause as Oberyn sat on a nearby stone bench, slowly, his face set in concentration. Doran liked watching his brother thin, when he bothered to take his mind off drinking, and fighting, and fugging and brooding over their revenge. Oberyn had a remarkable capacity for brilliant thought. He seemed to be exercising it now. This might change everything, Oberyn said heavily. There are the obvious things, the less obvious things, and the things that terrify me. This was enough to get Doran peering at his brother, worriedly. What terrifies you? Oberyn pulled a slight face. And then he paused. First, brother, let me ask you a question. When Lord Dane was here with Dawn, you were troubled, and you said that you had thought of something that Father told you. What was it? That Doran leant back in his seat tiredly. When I came of age, he said quietly, Father told me many things about what it means to be a Martell of Sunspear, the need to lead, the men I should watch, the women I should watch even harder, the agreements that were in place between us and King's Landing, and also the old agreements, the secret ones, within Doran. Oberyn stared at him. Within Doran. Agreements with the stony Dornish. Some are old. Oberyn, very old. And one dates back to the time of Nymeria. It is also a kind of prophecy. Something flickered in Oberyn's eyes at the very mention of the word prophecy, a combination of uncertainty and annoyance. Prophecy, eh? You do know that half of them are total pigs, Will, that can be bent like a serving girl into all manner of positions, whilst the other half are gibberish. He looked flintily back at his brother. This one is different. It was very clear. The Danes swore allegiance to our ancestors early on, with one condition, that nothing would ever stop them from going north, with Dawn if ever the call came. It was important to them, and when Nymeria had a dream that led to her confirming this, well, that set it in stone. Especially when she said that to stop the Danes from going north with Dawn would result in the fall of Sunspear, and of Dorne, and of all men in Westeros. His brother raised both eyebrows at him. So, he said thoughtfully, that was why you gave Lord Dane permission to go north, despite the fact that he's visibly dying. Doran nodded tiredly. A prophecy, but a clear one, my brother, and one that I hoped I would never have to see. But it came anyway, and now we have the news of the return of magic. Surely there has to be a connection. So, what are your conclusions? As magic has returned, Oberyn said heavily, we must view prophecy in a new light, a careful light, but we must view it again. I cannot imagine what this has done to the Citadel, but I imagine that every maester who has ever studied magic will be looking at it again. There's certain things that were alleged to be created by magic that might be affected. The wall, perhaps? Storm's End, anything at Sunspear, I know not. What worries me more, well, dragons. The loss of the Targaryen dragons, as they shrunk in size with every generation, that showed that magic was leaking out of this world. Now that it is back, well, what if some fool decides to try and bring a dragon egg to life with another version of Summerhall? What will people do with their dragon eggs, or their alleged dragon eggs? I can see trouble ahead. Doran looked at his brother for a long moment. And what of the thing that terrifies you? Oberyn raised his head a little and then grimaced. I have heard of many odd things of late. Robert Baratheon visits Storm's End for no reason, pulled by something. Rumor has it that he has discovered something. What? I do not yet know. Alstor Dane came here with a restless sword that drew a dying man north. Blackwoods swear great oaths with Brackens, ending centuries of hatred. Willis Tyrell is said to have stalked Highgarden like a man possessed by something or someone. The mountain clans of the Vale have vanished, apparently saying that they are going north, and Stark is asking for information about the others. Stark the pragmatist, Stark the practical, asks for information about a legend. And that, my brother, is what terrifies me. What if, in these times of magic, legends are real? And then Doran shivered as if his bones had for a moment turned to ice. Varys. He sat there in the silence of his room and stared at the map of Westeros that took up a part of one wall. He didn't really need the map. He knew every location as if it was etched in his mind. But it served to focus his mind, and the gods alone knew how much he needed that right now. Speaking of focus, he lifted his right hand and then smiled slightly. The shaking had stopped. That was a good thing. Memories what had been done to him by that madman who thought that he could revive blood magic. Well, such memories were bad ones. The pain, the blood, the need to move and scream when that was denied him. A finger twitched, but he willed it to be still. Yes, that was better. He returned his gaze to the map. Things were changing, altering, moving out of his gaze. And he disliked all of those things. He preferred people to be, well, reliable. Reliable people could be predictable, could be controllable. Instead, Robert Baratheon was in his own way deeply predictable. He could be relied upon to be headstrong, greedy, violent in his choice of actions, and overall a bad king. But his recent decision to go to Storm's End on a total whim was not predictable and was a mystery to Varys. Why had he gone? The one message that his little birds had been able to send him from that place had been a brief one. That the king had attacked a particularly foolish septon and had then vanished underground in the tunnels. It was all most peculiar and unpredictable. Other events were also worrying him. Apparently it was quite true that Aemon Targaryen had left Castle Black and gone to Winterfell. Why? Something to do with all this talk about the others, and apparently ravens were flying all over the north about the same things, as well as protestations of loyalty to the Stark in Winterfell. Ravens from south of the Neck, as well, apparently. And then there was all this strange activity in Highgarden, with Willis Tyrell apparently demolishing parts of walls and then screaming a lot. The message had been very shaky and unclear, as if the little bird who had written it had been shaken by something. He needed to look into that. He needed his little birds to be reliable these days. He didn't like it. It was chaos. Perhaps there was some kind of order behind it. Some pattern that he had yet to discern. But if there was, he couldn't yet see what it was. Varys pursed his lips slightly. Perhaps a raven to Illyrio. To see what he had learnt about it. After all, his old friend had his finger on a surprisingly large number of pulses. A small figure appeared in a doorway. Approached carefully. Deposited a small rolled-up message, and then vanished the way it had come. Varys picked it up and unrolled it quickly before reading it, and then both eyebrows went up and then down, and he lifted a plump hand to his mouth to swallow a chuckle. Oh dear. It seemed that a certain noble lord here in King's Landing was about to have his day. No, his entire life, absolutely ruined. Perhaps he should sell tickets. Pere. The warehouse smelt of many things. Rotten apples was the main odor, followed by old boxes, damp straw, mildew, and rat droppings. Such a charming bouquet, one that was seeping into his clothes with every moment that had passed since he'd been forced to take refuge in here, and that was a lot of moments. He closed his eyes for a long moment, and successfully resisted the temptation to shout at himself. He'd been stupid. He'd been hasty. He'd been arrogant. And he'd been stupid. Years of work, years of patience, years of careful maneuvering, all ruined, because he'd seen one of the pieces of the game move in a way that he hadn't foreseen, or at least had moved before he had anticipated. He'd always hoped that one day he might be able to manipulate dear sweet deluded Lysa in such a way that he could rise to power somewhere. There were so many intriguing possibilities, but Jon Arryn was an old man and his son was young and sickly, and the heir to the Vale, possession of Robert Arryn, was important. So he'd gambled, in a hurry and without a decent plan, and he'd lost. Fortunately, he'd had warning of the moment that he had lost. thanks to a hurried message from a gold cloak with a gambling problem who had apparently heard the news that the Hand of the King had issued a warrant for his arrest, not long after the fact. Fortunately, when he received the message, he had not been in the Red Keep, but instead visiting one of the many brothels that he owned in King's Landing, and he'd been able to slip out of a side door down an alleyway and into this warehouse that he also owned, where he was now waiting for nightfall. He looked at the upper story for a moment and sighed. He'd been able to leave a sign for one of his emergency plans to be activated. It wasn't a brilliant plan, it was dangerous, but at least it was better than sitting in a black cell awaiting a trial. He looked at the cloak and cowl, both made of rough and scratchy material that would be his disguise on the way to the meeting place. They'd better all be there. He had paid them well beforehand, with the promise of another payment once they got to the ship, and after that he would be well on his way to Bravos and the money that he'd been saving there for years. Well, diverting and then saving there. Bells tolled in the distance, and he looked up. Ah, almost sundown. Well, at least the waiting was almost over. He ran a hand over his smooth face. Parting with his facial hair had been a wrench, but also a necessity. People on the streets would be looking for him. Risking discovery just because of his vanity was nonsensical. As darkness finally started to fall, he put on the cloak, draped the cowl around his face, and then went out into the street. He faked a slight hitch in his gait, not enough to make people take notice of him, but just enough to make them think that here was an old man going home. The streets were alive with people, even as darkness fell. King's Landing seldom slept, but he stayed away from the lamps and the largest concentrations of people. Better to be careful, but soon he was away from the busiest areas, and in the more quiet streets. Of course there was danger here as well. A man on his own could easily fall victim to a footpad or three, and he clutched at the dagger up his sleeve every time someone walked past him. But nothing happened, and he passed on down the quiet streets until he reached an archway. Through he went, down a short dark alleyway, and then he was in front of the gate. He looked to either side carefully, and then pulled out his key and unlocked it. Once through, he made for the lit courtyard beyond. He could see a dark shape at a window above, with a crossbow on the window ledge. That was good. The four idiots sitting around a table in the courtyard with flagons of wine in front of them was bad. He huffed in fury as he pulled the cowl down and then shrugged off the cloak. I thought that you'd be ready by now. We have to go. No response, and he felt his hackles rise. By now news must have spread about the bounty on his head. He wondered what it was. Aaron must have promised quite a lot to whoever brought him in. Well, he had expected that, remember our bargain, and that I can pay you again in Bravos. More silence, and he paused and then peered at the figures. They were all very still. Perhaps too still. Slowly he walked up to them, and then reeled back once he smelt the blood, and the evidence that at least one of them had voided himself after dying. Dead. They were all dead. Someone behind him took a step forwards, boots scuffing on stone, and he turned in a flash. A lean man with dark hair and stubble, dressed in dark leather armor, was standing there cleaning his sword on a piece of rag. He smiled cheerily at Petter, after a moment, and then pointed at the dead men at the table with the hand holding the rag. I don't know exactly where you go them, but they were rubbish. Pay them much, did you? Petter narrowed his eyes. This man was new to him. You killed them all? Hopefully the man at the window would get this rogue with the crossbow. Why hadn't he before, though? Oh yes, the man said with that same cheery smile. Oh, if you're wondering about your man up there with that crossbow, he's dead too. First one I killed. Now he wasn't bad. I think he spotted me and almost got a warning out. Not that it did much. You must be Petter Baelish, by the way. Lost the fuzz, I see. Shame about the gray streaks in the hair, and everything else about you. The dagger was still up one sleeve, and all he needed to do was get close, but perhaps there were other ways. You found me out. Clever of you. The man shrugged. Nah, easy, really. I know a lot of people here. More than a few thieves, too. People like that tend to know where's safe to steal from, and where's not. This is one of the places that has a warning outside, in thief speak, of course. A lord like you wouldn't be able to see it, by the way. So I wondered who owned this place. Turned out it was you. Eddie's tongue moistened suddenly. Very dry lips. Very resourceful of you, then. Tell me, what's your name? I always need good men. Braun. Cutter sketched a salute. Pleased to meet you, friend Braun. I see no house colors on you. So you cannot be from the Tower of the Hand. Oh, I'm not. Bronn smiled that cheery smile again. I'm just a sellsword, but Lord Aaron sent me after you. He seems a bit annoyed with you. Aha, a sellsword. He could work with this. Whatever Jon Arryn is paying you, I'll double it. The cheery smile again, but with something else behind the eyes. Oh, he said, that you'd say that. It was good of him to warn me. Very generous man, Lord Aaron. This was not going as he had hoped. Then I'll triple it. As I said, I always need good men. Bronn pursed his lips slightly, and then wiped his sword again. I'm guessing you have a plan. Wait, let me guess. Get to the docks, get to a ship, get to Essos, and then access money that you've been squirreling away for an emergency. Paddock smiled a little. An excellent guess. Not a bad plan, Bronn said, as he stuffed the rag into a pouch, and then looked at him. Just a few problems with it. Problems? Well, firstly, the Hand of the King said that you'd try and bribe me, or rather better his own offer. Nothing wrong with that, I'm a sellsword, but he also pointed out a few facts. First, that every gate is watched, as is every wharf. Getting you away wouldn't be as easy as you might think. I'm just the one man, I can't fight my way through a gauntlet and protect you at the same time. Then there's the fact that you're offering money that you can only get in Essos. You can't adhere, not with everything you own being ransacked. And it is, right now. Lord Aaron's got some mousy little fellow going through your books. And the secret books you had. Shock roiled through him. No, they were too well hidden. I've known a lot of clever men. Odd how they always hide things in places that they think are hard to find, but aren't. Bronn looked at him with a wry smile. There was a lot there. Every property, every bribe, every transaction. You're a ruined man, Lord Baelish. Lord Aaron can afford my fee and then pay me again several times over by the morning. You, on the other hand, are a bad investment. This was slipping away from him too fast for comfort. Do you have any idea what I could pay you in Bravos? Bronn pulled a thoughtful face, and for a moment Pater felt his heart rise in exultation. But then the sellsword shook his head. No, I don't, but then I'll guess that you don't either. The ravens are flying, Lord Baelish. Lots of information in those books, plus Lord... and what was his name? Oh yes, Lord Varys turned up and said that he had details of your account in Bravos. Lord Aaron was very pleased with him. Horror stole over him. No, this was disaster. He had to get away. The dagger he needed to get rid of this smirking man and get away from here. His hand flashed into his sleeve for the pommel of his knife, but as he reached for it, he could see Bronn darting to one side. As the dagger emerged, he saw movement to his right, and he looked up just in time to see a fist crash into his temple, and everything went black. Tywin. He went through the books quickly, but carefully. There was a lot of information to take in, and as always, a lot of instructions to send out. He liked this time of the day, just him and the books, with a pile of outgoing messages quickly piling up to one side. People to be paid. People who owed him money. People who needed to be encouraged to repay their debts. And others who needed an abject reminder, perhaps, if they were not already aware that it was dangerous to cross him, of what happened to people who got on his bad side. Besides, it helped to take his mind off the nagging feeling that was still weighing him down. That pull north, that feeling that he needed to be elsewhere in Casterly Rock. That irrational, illogical, maddening pull. It had to be ignored. That way madness lay. He worked on, looking at the books, the accounts, the details that were so vital to the proper administration of the Westerlands. And then, finally, he was finished. He locked the books away, picked up the messages that needed to be sent, deposited them in a box to one side for the maester, and then strode out. He needed a light lunch. Instead, he found his brother waiting for him outside. Kevin looked disturbed. Tywin, not now. Yes, now. I must speak with you. And I need to eat. So if you must speak, then speak, and walk. His brother rolled his eyes a little, and then followed him. We must speak about what is going on. And what is going on? Kevin scowled at him. Why do you continue to ignore what has happened? Tywin, the ravens from Old Town are clear. The glass candles can be relit. Magic has returned. Tywin, magic. He felt a muscle flutter in his cheek, and he sternly willed his face to obey his instructions. That has yet to be proved. Yet to be, Tywin, my brother. Why do you continue to deny this? Because it has yet to be proved, he snarled, the words furiously before catching himself and taking a deep breath as they passed down a long corridor. The glass candles can be relit, and then there was that voice. That voice, Tywin. Do not deny that you did not hear it. The others return. Stark needs our help. He stopped for an instant and then waved a finger under Kevin's nose. A mummer's trick was something contrived by a faceless man from Essos to panic us into something that I cannot see. Kevin stared at him with wide eyes. Tywin, why can you not see clearly on this matter? Tywin worked his jaw for a moment and then resumed his walk towards lunch. Because I remember Aerys and his madness. He mentioned dragons a great deal. There were times towards the end of my handship when I wondered if the tragedy of Summerhall would be repeated under my nose. Talk of dragons, talk of magic. He waved a finger in the air. Magic is inconstant, from the tales, unpredictable, despite what some people might claim, and it breeds madness. Summerhall again. How many dead because of that? As magic dwindled, so did the dragons of King's Landing. Perhaps it was right that it did so. It left the Targaryens reliant on steel and blood and good counsel. When that good counsel was insufficient, when the steel broke, when the blood failed, well, that saw the end of the Targaryens. If magic has returned, then the rules of the Game of Thrones have changed, brother. Changed to a different level. A more unpredictable level. A return of dragons would destabilize things a great deal. Obviously, they had reached the room where he had arranged to have lunch, and he poured some wine and then nibbled on a piece of fresh bread. Kevin sat to one side and peered at him as if he was trying to discern him properly. You are worried about dragons? His brother said eventually. No, I am worried about fools who think that they can wake dragons, or rather their eggs. Once word gets out that magic has, apparently, returned, every idiot in the Seven Kingdoms will be dreaming up fanciful and dangerous schemes. Did you ever hear the tale of how Varys became a eunuch? You shouldn't hear it when you have a full stomach. You'll vomit every mouthful out. I have a very good source on that matter. No, if magic has returned, we'll get every kind of insanity. Kevin nodded slowly. And dragons can be dealt with, he muttered. And Stark's obsession in the north. Tywin felt an odd cross between a sneer and frown cross his face. It unsettled him. I know not. I want to proclaim it madness, as the others are no more than a myth, but I still cannot explain it. Perhaps Tyrion will find out something at Winterfell, if he can keep his nose out of a bottle, a book, or a brothel, that is. His brother winced. You do him a disservice. He is your son, and dwarf, though he be. There is a fine head on his shoulders. He has an excellent mind. Tywin paused to glower at Kevin. He cavorts with whores. He drinks too much, and above all, he is a dwarf. He is also your heir. Well, once you officially announce it, Tywin shook his head. Then he will be my heir. Once I get him out of that damn white cape, that is. Tyrion, never. Kevin sighed and then looked about for some food of his own. Very well, and now a different issue. Perhaps, too, the voice? Can you explain that? Truly? A mummer's trick. Tywin said in a voice that was part snarl and part sigh. As I said, I heard it. As did you. In different parts of Casterly Rock, Tywin, 'twas no trick. Something has changed. Something has called us. The blood of the first men is within us. Brother, it may be diluted by Andal blood, but it is still there and it cannot be denied. He ate slowly, the taste of the food and the wine almost dead in his mouth. If so, he said eventually, it was a call from the dead to those who no longer care. The others are a myth, so therefore Ned Stark needs no help from us. Will get no help from us. This got his brother peering at him again, as something flickered in his eyes. The North and the Westerlands used to be very close, Tywin. What if this call is for the repayment of a debt? He stopped eating for a moment as his brain processed this. It was a good point. Then he shrugged. All debts we owe the North have long since been paid. Now, your other point. I want to reopen the North Passage. I feel a need to go there. He regarded his brother with a steely glare. No. He grated the word out with great finality. Tywin, I said no. We are to pay no mind to the fripperies and the fancies that our father held so dear. Kevin leant forwards. Tywin, There must have been a reason why he liked that passage so much, and that room. The runes there are meaningless? And besides, our father was a weak-minded fool. Now that is my final answer. Get out. His brother sighed again, directed a glare of his own at Tywin, but then obeyed his order. As he left, Tywin gazed northwards in the general direction of that damn passage. Then he set his jaw and looked away. No, it would not do. Besides, anything that fascinated his father had to be pure idiocy. Daenerys? She stood on the balcony on the terrace and stared out at the sea. She was looking north. She could tell that. How exactly she knew that, however, was a different story, and a harder one to explain. She felt this pull, which confused her. She'd never felt it before. Westeros, she knew, felt it as well, but he had his own theory about it. It was the pull of destiny, he said. The pull home to King's Landing. Home. She often wondered where that was exactly. She had no memories of Dragonstone, where she had been born, and all she knew of King's Landings were tales and drawings. Those were supposed to be the places where the Targaryens were supposed to be based, were supposed to call home. She didn't really know where home was, or what home was like, other than the house with the red door in Bravos, from many years ago. She and her brother had gone from city to city, all over Essos it seemed, with their tiny retinue. Mother had died giving birth to her. Sarah Willem, old dear kind Sarah Willem, was dead. There was little gold and it seemed little support for her brother's claim to the Iron Throne. She worried about him. Viserys was a proud man but also increasingly bitter. He had great dreams, but lacked the means to do anything. She'd heard the reports of what the little folk called him, the Beggar King. She often wondered if he knew. She daren't tell him. She was too afraid of angering him. But now things were a little different. Here they were in Pentos, in a great manse that overlooked the sea, under the protection of Magister Ilio Mopatis, a powerful and very rich merchant. And also a very fat man. He hadn't always been so, because there was a statue of him in armor on the grounds, where he looked, well, almost handsome. Such days were long since past. Dany still wasn't quite sure what to make of Illyrio Mopatis. Yes, he was very generous, and had taken them in and promised them his full support. But why now? Why not earlier? Had it been because Viserys had been so young at the beginning? Boy kings, she knew, seldom prospered, but why not take them in from the start, until Viserys had grown up? Had it been the danger from the usurper's assassins? The manse was guarded by Unsullied, the almost emotionless eunuch soldiers, and there was the little matter of the man's eyes. They seldom showed much emotion, no matter how much he smiled at her. She wasn't sure how much she trusted him. But Viserys did trust him, so she remained quiet. She sighed a little and then walked to the little grotto, what she had discovered on her third day at the manse. It was quiet there, in that little shaded spot by the trees. Few people went there, she knew now, although there was a path that snaked by it, heading down to the sea. Sitting on the old stone bench, she stared north again. She wished she knew why she felt this pull. It was odd. She also wondered why Mopatis had been so bemused these past few days. Hearing footsteps and voices, she looked around. Someone was on the balcony and the wind was carrying a muttered conversation. It was the Magister. Must be patient, she heard. He has been patient all this time. He can be patient. A little longer. He will not like it, but I will tell him, said a resigned and sibilant voice that had a peculiar accent to it. When should he come? There was a brief silence. In a month's time, Moteptis said eventually. We should have more news by then. Our friend in King's Landing will have sent more word about what in the name of the Seven Hells is going on, and we will have more news of the Dothraki and their sudden move east. I do not like this change. There is something in the wind that makes me uneasy. A gurgling laugh, then the other voice. Magic has returned, so you should be uneasy. We should all be uneasy. Word has come from Korth that the House of the Undying is no longer dying. A pause. It is a warm day, but I see you shiver. Are you suddenly cold? You would shiver too if you had ever seen that accursed place. Moteptis growled. Warlocks and madmen. Anyway, tell Connington to wait. Especially as the Company of the Rose are going home to Westeros. There are just enough men there who might recognize his face. They always were obsessed with the home that they exiled themselves from. More madness. Another pause before the other voice spoke again. this time in a lower voice that Dany could barely hear. "And what of the beggar king and his sister?" "Not here," Mateptis replied almost as quietly, and then the two moved away, as she could tell by the sound of receding footsteps. She sat there for a while, puzzling through what she had heard. She did not doubt that she had not been meant to hear it. The mention of the cruel nickname for her brother told her that at least Connington, that name seemed familiar. And what was the House of the Undying? And what was this talk of magic? Once she was sure that there was no one on the balcony, she walked up there and then looked at the manse. Oh, Viserys was pacing about in front of it, deep in thought, and with his hands behind his back. She approached him cautiously. "Are you well, brother?" Viserys started slightly, and then stared at her. "Dany, there you are. Have you heard?" This made her cautious. "Heard what?" And now her brother's eyes and face came alight with a strange and almost terrible glow. "Why?" "Word has come from the Citadel. Magic has returned." "Dany, magic. Do you know what that means?" Bewildered at his vehemence, she shook her head. "Dragons. Dany, dragons. If magic has returned, then so can dragons. And a Targaryen king needs Targaryen dragons. I will instruct Magister Motepis to bring me the biggest dragon egg that he can find, because I will be able to hatch it." She smiled at him weakly, as her brother continued to babble, but all of a sudden she was deathly afraid of him, and she did not know why. Tyrion. The twins was, well, it wasn't Casterly Rock. It was impressive in its own way, but the home of the Frey's vast family that they were was basically not a patch on Harrenhal or Casterly Rock. That said, as the only crossing point over the Green Fork for hundreds of miles, it had a number of points top recommended. Anyone trying to besiege it would be in trouble right from the start. You'd need to assault both ends at the same time to make an impact. Plus you'd need to make river traffic untenable. Tyrion peered at the place as his party approached the south end of the Twins. Oh, he could see why some regarded it as one of the strongest fortresses in Westeros. But then he could also see the weak points. Break the bridge connecting the Twins, and you'd have the job of taking it. Siege engines would work. From the right place. Plus there was a forest to the north. Lots of huge trees there. A few axes, get the trunks to the water. Child's play. He frowned to himself a little. Where had that come from? His thoughts had been decidedly martial of late. Perhaps it had been all the reading that he had done about the north. The links between Casterly Rock and Winterfell had once been far better than they were now. Well, father had always been too busy rebuilding the respect owed to the Lannister name to really spend the time needed to butter up the other lords paramount. His comments about Mace Tyrell could best be described as derogatory and at worst woundingly accurate. A small party of horsemen were waiting at the gateway, and he lifted a hand in greeting at their leader, a youngish man with brown hair and a certain look about him that proclaimed him to be a Frey. "I bid you welcome to the Twins. You are Tyrion Lannister? I see that word of my approach has spread. Yes, I am Tyrion Lannister. My men and I are on our way to Winterfell, post-haste. I must therefore use your splendid bridge, with your permission, sir." "Seratidos Frey, at your service. Passage is not a problem, not for the son of Lord Lannister. However, my grandfather, Lord Frey, has expressed a desire to talk to you." Tyrion swapped a look with Aemon, the man that Captain Harkland had chosen to get him to Winterfell, and a damned good man he was too, one able to think on his feet and organize things in a trice. Aemon raised his eyebrows at him, and he shook his head. "Get the men fed and watered. The day is only half done, and we have a long way to go. I will talk to Lord Frey." Then he turned to Seratidos, such an ironic name, and smiled. "Lead on, Ser." The great hall at the Twins was odd. There was a coldness to it that was not of temperature, but rather of the soul. The main source of that coldness seemed to be Lord Walder Frey, an ancient man who sat on his great black chair, with his carved representation of the Twins on it, and stared at him over the table. There was the remains of lunch strewed about the table, and Lord Frey was busy slurping wine from a goblet. The overall atmosphere was one of fear, namely fear of Lord Frey, who had eyes that glittered with malice the moment that he caught sight of Tyrion. Malice and something else. Greed. So this was the infamous late Lord Frey. "So you're the dwarf," Lord Frey barked slightly wetly from his cup, before placing the goblet down and wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. To one side, a woman looked at him timidly. She had long brown hair and a look of abject docility. "Lannister's son, I thought that you were shorter." "Lord Frey," Tyrion replied grandly. "Yes, I am indeed Tyrion Lannister, the son of Lord Lannister, the Lord Paramount of the Westerlands, and the Warden of the West." Those greedy eyes stared at him. "Big titles," he muttered. "Your father wasn't a bad hand. What did he do to get a son like you, though?" "Speaking for myself, he must have an uncommon amount of luck to get a son as intelligent as me. May I ask why you wanted to see me, Lord Frey?" "Other than to exchange veiled insults, that is." "Curb your tongue, dwarf," growled a man with a black beard to one side. "Show some respect." Walder Frey leant back in his chair and beamed at Tyrion. "My bastard son, Black Walder, he has a temper, little Lannister." Tyrion eyed the man scornfully. He seemed to be angry, foolish, and prideful. "What a combination. I'm sure he does. Now, what do you wish to talk about, my lord?" "You seek passage over the river to get to Winterfell." "Why?" Tyrion looked at the men through slightly narrowed eyes. Something was going here. There was a current of something else at work. House Stark seeks information about the others, about the past. House Lannister wishes to help, so my father has sent me with many books and information. We are traveling fast. Is that what you require in terms of information? Lord Frey leant forwards again. "No, I like it not when ravens fly for no reason. Something is going on, and I do not know what. The Brackens in the Blackwoods have stopped their great feud and sworn a great oath to protect the land against the others, which are a myth. There are reports that some great force of men have forded the Green Fork downstream, which should be impossible. And now you arrive. Many mysteries, Lannister. Many mysteries." He absorbed the information with a frown. Blackwoods and Brackens united against a legend. "Lord Frey, this is passing odd. I have been at sea these many days. I know little about what has happened of late. However, I can say this much. I am simply on my way to Winterfell with books about legends. No more, and no less." The glittering eyes assessed him, and as before, found him wanting. "The small folk are abuzz," Lord Frey grumbled. "Especially those with the blood of the first men. A lot of idiots are babbling nonsense about the Stark in Winterfell. Brackens and Blackwoods making a pact. Absurd. And now you come. A Lannister. A tiny stunted thing, but still a Lannister. And now the maesters say that the glass candles can be relit, and that magic has returned." Superstitious balderdash. Excitement stirred in his mind as he thought about the implications. Magic! This was fascinating. What else had he missed during his travels? What else had happened? Grumbling from the chair diverted his attention, and then he realized that Lord Frey was looking at him. "I see plots, little Lannister. Plots and alarums. All around me, and I do not like it." "And yet," Tyrion said as he clasped his hands behind his back, and then sent a glare back at the revolting old man, "all I seek is passage to Winterfell, on a mission from my father, Lord Tywin Lannister." He thought about adding the words "who has a very long arm" at times, but then decided not to deploy such a phrase. Lord Frey glared at him again with hooded eyes, thought for a long, long moment, and then shrugged a little as he picked up his wine again and slurped noisily from the goblet. "Send word once you find out what's going on. Are you married?" Tyrion blinked at the sudden change of topic, and then suppressed his bewilderment. "No, I am not married. Why do you wish to know?" The Lord of the Twins gestured at the women at the table to his left. "I've got a lot of daughters, always trying to get rid of them by marrying them off. Want to take a look and find yourself a Freyth for a wife?" The various women stirred briefly as a mixture of emotions ran visibly through them, only to meet Lord Frey's glare and then go silent and still. Tyrion resisted the temptation to grab a goblet and then drink a lot. "Sadly, and with all due respect to the lovely ladies of your house, I have to leave at once for Winterfell, and I must add that not to consult my father as to my choice of wife would be unfortunate." Tyria's face came to mind for a moment, and he suppressed it. However, something of that suppression must have shown in his face for a moment, because Lord Frey paled a little. "Very well," the old man grumbled. "Go, Dwarf Lannister. Go on your trip to chase myths and legends in Winterfell." Tyrion bowed with just enough respect. He felt the horrible creature in the chair, deserved, and then strode out in as fast, but dignified a pace as he could manage. This was a place to avoid in the future. The Septon. His dreams had been unsettled these past days, and sleep often did not come easily. When he did sleep, he often woke with a start, breathing hard and feeling oppressed and frightened, as if he was in danger, but he couldn't remember his dreams. Other than a general feeling that he was drowning, being pulled downwards by some savage weight. He blinked at the book in front of him. There was another weight on him. He had been doing a lot more studying about the Iron Islands, and he had come to a sudden and terrible conclusion. His father was an idiot. He didn't like that conclusion. In fact, he hated it. He was Ironborn, a follower of the drowned god, the only remaining son of Bell and Greyjoy. But he had to admit that the Greyjoy rebellion had been a total disaster from beginning to end. The timing had been more than poor. It had been stupid. It had united the rest of Westeros, except for Dorne, against the Ironborn, and it had given King Robert a moment of glory. All it had gotten the Ironborn had been death and destruction. If his father had wanted an independent Iron Islands again, why not convince old Quellen Greyjoy to declare independence during Robert's rebellion? It was senseless. The Fatson closed the book slowly and then looked at the window. Something was happening. Lord Stark had been closeted in his solar for more than 2 days now, apparently talking to someone from the north. Who exactly that person was? Well, it was a mystery. Lord Umber was rattling around Winterfell, being irritated. Robb was in the middle of his own studies, and Snow, well, he'd found him in the catacombs the other day, in front of the tomb of Lyanna Stark. He'd been crying. Normally, Theon would have smirked and done his best to say something rude about that sight, but he hadn't had the heart to do so, for some reason. Why? What was wrong with him, of late? What was this feeling of pressure, of being pushed and then almost torn in two? He yawned raggedly. He needed sleep. A lot of sleep. But first, some food. It was a quiet meal. Lady Stark sat next to Robb, due to Lord Stark still being locked in his solar, with Lord Umber next to Robb. He liked the great Shan, whose booming laugh and quiet wisdom enlivened any room. To one side, Bran and young Robert Arryn were busy asking Demeric Bolton a lot of questions, again about being a knight, while Sansa watched them all with a smile. On the other side, Arya was busy making faces at Rickon whenever Lady Stark wasn't looking, making the little boy giggle until he got the hiccups. And then there was Jory Castle on one of the other tables, making hesitant small talk with the Arryn boy's nurse. Something was going on there. After the Clarion thought about sneaking out and seeing a whore, but he was too tired. His mind was singing with tiredness by now, and he waved goodbye to Robb and went to his room, where he undressed and then virtually fell into bed, remembering at the last moment to pull the sheets over him, and then he slept. It was the smell that bothered him enough to crack an eye open. It was a smell of death, of putrefaction. It was a familiar smell, and he came bolt upright. He was sprawled in the broken remains of the boat. From the dream that had left him with that odd wound, the ship had been run ashore. He could hear breakers to either side of him, and the oars were shattered and broken. Where were the rowers? He peered around and then almost voided his stomach. They were scraps of broken bones, wrapped in tattered rags, strewn about the place. The only thing that was intact was the mast, and he looked at it fearfully before he climbed shakily to his feet and looked about. He was dressed in shabby, rusty armor, with an empty scabbard hanging to one side from a worn strap that attached it to his belt. Where was he? And then he saw the shore. It was not sand. It was not rock. It was not earth. It was made from bones. Shattered bones. As far as the eye could see, he looked up. There was no sun. Or if there was a sun, it was hidden in the twilight, all around. Tendrils of fog roiled about, making it hard to see what was there. Suddenly a hand landed on his shoulder and he was violently thrown onto the shore. He landed in a spray of bone fragments that went everywhere, and he cried out in revulsion, before somehow finding his feet shakily and looking about. When he saw the other figure, he recoiled. It was Roderick. If his brother had looked bad before, he looked far, far worse now. The black robes were gray and tattered. His skin was black and peeling enough that in places he could see white bone. One arm was a broken stump that ended at the elbow, and there seemed to be something wrong with his neck, from the way that he peered at him. "There you are, little brother." Roderick's voice was a tired wheeze, as if he was about to collapse. "Finding you again was difficult. As you can see." Jackson stared at him in horror. "What are you? What are you really?" A noise that might have been a luff came in answer to his question. "Why? Your brother, and a servant of the drowned god. What is dead can never die. Why have you brought me here? Theon found himself shouting the words. He was angry and afraid, and he stopped breathing for a moment. The shore was familiar. I told you that I did not want to come here, that I chose the other shore. Something that might have been discussed crossed the features that putrefaction had left of Roderick's face. Your choice? It means nothing, boy. You are Ironborn, a Greyjoy. You must be brought back. It is your destiny. There is a fate that awaits you. The drowned god must have his due. So I brought you here, despite the cost. The Septon looked around them wildly. Mehran. Where is Mehran? Bone and ash. Cost! As I said, the thing that had once been his brother pointed to a spot behind Theon. Come! We have someone to meet. The Septon looked behind him, and then felt the blood drain from his face, as the fog blew aside just long enough to reveal a distant throne on what looked a mound of white rocks. Wait, no, they were not rocks. They were skulls, and on the throne there was a slumped figure, who was slowly looking in his direction. Terror stabbed into his heart and he looked back. No, I will not. The rotted face leant forwards. You are a Greyjoy boy. You serve the drowned god. 1,000 thoughts went through his mind as he stared back at his dead brother, and then he heard the sound of someone far behind him walking on the shore of shattered bones, walking slowly, walking towards him. Septon closed his eyes for a long moment, and then opened them again, and as he did he felt something in his hand. He did not look at it. He had no idea where it had come from, but suddenly he knew instinctively what it was. No, he said quietly. I do not. Roderick's face twisted into a snarl as his remaining hand came around to slash at him, but before it could start its downwards leap, Theon thrust the weirwood stake that had somehow appeared in his hand into his brother's chest. Black ether burst from the wound and a foul stench filled the air, but Theon ignored it all and just pushed that stake all the way into the spot where Roderick's heart should have been. The thing that had been his brother jerked and screamed, and then collapsed, as if all the tendons had been cut, and as the body hit the ground it broke apart into a black smear of foul liquid and stained bones. Theon stared down, panting. And then he heard a scream of rage, and the slow steps behind him speeded up. I can't look at it. I don't want to look at it, he thought as he bunched his muscles and then ran for the beached boat. The mast. He had to get to the mast. It was important. Roderick had thrown him further than he had thought, as his feet slipped and slithered through the bones and the skulls underfoot. He fell not once, but twice, and he sobbed with terror as he heard the thing behind him start to catch up, and then he was at the boat, leaping over the sides and then hurling himself at the mast. Old gods, he shouted as he touched it. Hear me. I choose you. I deny the drowned god. Hearken to me. The mast shuddered as the face of the heart tree that he had seen before reappeared. Are you sure, Theon Greyjoy?
This cannot be undone.
The boat rocked as something pulled at it. Something with a hideous strength. The air was foul with a stink that he had never even dreamed could ever exist. And something was close enough that he could feel its fetid breath on the back of his neck. He knew that he should not look at it. Not if he wanted to retain his sanity. I am sure. I choose the way of the Starks. I would lead my people away from death. I choose you, the old gods. Light exploded from the mast. No, from the tree that was suddenly there. Light that drove out all the shadows. Light that drove away the gibbering screams that he heard diminishing behind him. Darren said and came awake with a scream, and when he ran his hands over his face, the scab from the previous odd wound was gone, and around his neck there was a leather thong that had not been there before, with something metal. He peered at it as he panted, an image of a heart tree. Robb. When the word finally came as they broke their fast, that father was out of his solar and wanted to speak to him, as well as the Greyton, Dom Eric, and John. Robb let out a sigh of relief. He had no idea what had been taking his father so long to plan. According to Mother and Luwin, father was consulting with an important visitor from the north, or so father had told them, without divulging a name. And so he led the little party down the corridor, before pausing. Thimpson had appeared and was running towards him, looking as if he had either dressed in the dark or in a tearing hurry. Robb, I need to talk to your father at once, Greyjoy panted. There was something different about him. He looked shaken and... Wait. Your face! That mark from that dream is gone. Aye, Poseidon said in as serious a voice as he had ever heard from him. "'T was another dream about the old gods, and your father told me to tell him the moment that I had another one." "You're in luck then, lad," Greatson boomed. "Ned's finally out of his solar and whatever the hell's he's been doing in there. Sent word for us to join him. You'd best come with us." "What's that?" John pointed to a leather strap that could be just seen around Theon's neck, part hidden by the rumpled shirt he was wearing. The Septon paled a little. "I think that it was a gift from the old gods." Everyone stopped walking for a moment and then stared at Theon Greyjoy. "The old gods?" the Greatson asked in astonishment. "I thought that you Ironborn followed the drowned god." The Septon looked at the tall lord. "This Ironborn is a follower of the old gods now," he said in a low voice. "I deny the drowned god. His way is a way of death and madness." They resumed their walk, only this time in silence, and as they walked Robb thought about the change that had come over Theon since he had returned from death. Things were now very different. Was that difference for good or evil? His money was now on good, but the more things changed, the less he recognized from the previous time he had lived these days. One thing was for sure though, he was feeling a pull to the woods again, stronger than he had felt it before. Something was there, and in the next day or so, he needed to go there urgently. They reached the door to the solar, and Robb knocked politely. When he heard the muttered "come," he opened the door. Father was inside, seated at his desk, which was now piled even higher with papers and books. The great map to one side had been moved and was hanging in a different place, and there was something about it that caught his attention. There were marks on it, on places north of the wall, in places that he had never seen before. "Crefew, your pardon, but I did not summon you," Father said puzzledly. "No, Lord Stark, you did not, but you did say that if I ever dreamt about the old gods again, I was to come to you at once." "Well, I have. Last night, I dreamt that I was back on the same boat as before, but that it was wrecked upon an island, the island that I was trying to get my brothers to steer away from in the last dream. Lord Stark, his face shuddered in horror. It was a place built of bones, a place built of death. Roderick was there again, but he was changed, rotted further, in tattered clothes. He said that I had been brought back, despite the cost, and then he tried to take me to see that figure on the throne that I told you about. I think it was the drowned god. It smelt of death. I fought my way out of it. I stabbed my brother with a piece of wood. Weirwood, I think, although I don't know where it came from, and then I ran to the boat, and to that mast. His face was haggard at the memory. Something was following me, Lord Stark. The thing from the throne. I knew that if I looked at it, it would drive me mad. I knew it, Lord Stark. So I called to the old gods. And, I said that I chose them. I rejected the drowned god. Tears were rolling down the San's face now, and Robb reached out and laid a hand on his shoulder, in an effort to comfort him. "You did the right thing," Robb muttered quietly. "The right thing." And then Theon reached to his neck and pulled out a leather thong, with a silver disc attached to it. There was a heart tree engraved on it. "I woke up with this, Lord Stark." Father stood and peered at it, his face set in lines of shock. Then those lines relaxed a little. "You have been favored by the old gods, Daenerys. Favored indeed. Very well, you must stay here and listen. Afterwards you must go to the Godswood, with Robb. Robb, you must tell him where you have come back from." "Father," he said, the word in shock. "The Septon is not what he was. You must tell him." Father nodded once and then returned to his desk. "Now, I must introduce someone. A man from further north than we are familiar with." Footsteps scuffed in the corridor, and then a man with graying hair and dark garments walked in. He looked at them all carefully and then nodded formally before closing the door behind him, and then stalking over to a chair and sitting with a sigh. Father then glared at them all, which was surprising. "This man, by the way, is here under my protection, and his name is Mance Rayder." There was a stunned pause, and then just as Greatson Umber started to gather his legs under him and fumble at the dagger at his belt, Lord Eddard Stark stood abruptly. "Sit down, Greatson. He's here under guest rights, under my protection. You cannot harm a hair on his head." The room rang from the sound of Father's shout, and Greatson Umber, Lord of the Last Hearth and the bravest man Robb had ever met, actually quailed at the sound of Lord Stark's anger. After a moment he tried to find his voice. But, guest writes, Great John, you don't harm a hair on his head. Father glared at them all before sitting with a sigh of his own, and then passing a hand over his weary face. And besides, he needs our help. His people need our help. Take a look at the map, all of you. Go on, now. Frowning, Robb stood up and then walked over to the map, followed by the others. As he approached it, his eyes widened. The area north of the wall had new markings on it, denoting settlements. A lot of markings, and names for entire areas. Then was a new one to him, as was Hopenorn. Father, what are these places? Wilding settlements. Father was watching them all carefully. There are a lot more of them than we all might have thought. How many of the buggers are there? Greatson burst out in puzzlement. I've never heard of these places. Well, apart from Hardhome, that's a place of dark memory according to the Night's Watch. No one ever worked out what happened there. Father looked at Raider, who was sipping wine from a goblet and watching them with a wry look on his face. Noticing the sudden attention, he placed the goblet on the nearby table and sighed. I can call on a host of the free folk, and when I say host, I mean at least 100,000 people. All but Father stared at him as if he was mad, and then Gritchan guffawed with laughter. 100,000 people. North of the wall. Don't be daft, man. That's far more than live in that icy hellhole. Ned, he's lying to you. But all this got him was a shake of the head. Great son, what do we know of the lands beyond the wall? Truly no. The wildlings have been there a long time, since before the wall was built. And they have long memories and presumably no small amount of skill at surviving in that area. So, no, I don't think that he's lying. And take careful note of what he said, that he could call upon a host of that number, not that such a number is the total number of people north of the wall. Lord Stark is right, Raider sighed. I don't know what the total number is there. Perhaps twice what I can call upon. Greatson's amused scorn seemed to be giving way to horror. By the gods, he muttered, so many— Your pardon, Lord Stark, Domeric Bolton said suddenly. This place, Hopenorn, why is it the northernmost location? Is there a reason for that? And that seemed to buy him a smile of approval from Father. A good question, Domeric. The smile fled his face. That is the fortress of the others, we think at least. That is where I saw the Night King, in my vision, when the Heartstone was returned here by Lord Umber. They all stared at that point on the map in some dread. So that's where the bastards come from, Greychild breathed. So far north. Robb turned and then stared at Raider, who smiled cheerily back at him. You said you could call upon a host. For what purpose? Is this your son, Lord Stark? Raider smirked slightly at Father's nod. Smart lad, I was going to assemble a host. Storm Castle Black, get my people through the wall at the tunnel there. Settle the gift, and then knock the heads of the Black Crows together until they realized that the free folk would help defend the wall against the others. He then sipped some more wine, because the others are coming, and death marches with them. Robb turned to see the blood thunder into the face of Grayson Nimber before grabbing his arm. Guest writes, Grayson? Be calm. Besides, Father sighed. He's right. We need to get the wildlings south of the wall. It's imperative. The group collectively stared at him. Oh, by the old gods, Father stared at the ceiling for a moment. Think about it for a moment. The others are coming. The wildlings know this. The wildlings have seen them. We have, Raider said somberly. They strike southwards with every day that passes, killing the free folk and animating their bodies. We are running from them, and we have nowhere else to go but south of the wall. Great son, think about it. Every wildling that dies to the others becomes a whites, every one of them, and if Raider's count of the numbers of wildlings is correct. Father's voice drifted into silence, and Robb found himself experiencing the horrible feeling of all the blood, apparently draining from his face. By the old gods, he choked out. The others would be able to send scores of thousands of whites south, against the wall, if not hundreds of thousands. A deadly silence filled the room for a long moment, as each man in there thought about the prospect of such an event. And the face of Gretchen Umber was whiter than parchment, as he sank into the nearest chair. The silence was broken by Father as he stood up, his chair scraping the floor as he pushed it back. Which is why I have been talking to Raider. We have been discussing what needs to be done. Winter is indeed coming. A hard and terrible winter. I feel it in my very bones. Perhaps that is why the others come. A long winter, a long night, a long terrible, terrible night. We will need every source of strength as we fight that long night. Every sword and every shield. The gift is almost deserted now, for many reasons. I would have it farmed. I would have it settled. I would have it feed the wall. The new gift too. Winterfell has some measure of control over both, and I was considering settling new lords and small folk there once the winter was over, but that was before I knew what comes, before I knew the threat. Well, enough is enough. I will tell the Lord Commander of the Night's Watch that the Stark in Winterfell commands that the wildlings be allowed south to settle in the abandoned areas of the gift and new gift, and I will not take no for an answer. There was a silence whilst they all absorbed that, and then a worried Grayton leaned forwards a little, Ned-eyed. Many of the other lords of the north won't like it. Wildlings south of the wall are better than whited wildlings north of it, under the control of the others. There's a war coming, and they all know that the others have returned. They have all sent pledges of allegiance and help. They all have the blood of the first men in them, and they all heard the call from the Hearthstone. I will write to them, telling them of my decision. We have a war to fight, a war that our ancestors started, and which we very nearly failed to realize was still going on. My father will understand, Daenerys said suddenly. He was still at the map, looking at all the new settlements that it now showed. Father is pragmatic. Oh, I know he is. Robb thought as he remembered the knife going in, and Rose Bolton's mutter that Jaime Lannister send his regards. But that was then. This is now. Raider was looking at Daenerys in slight puzzlement, which brought a small guffaw to the lips of Grayton. Oh, his father's a most pragmatic man. This is Daenerys Bolton from the Dreadfort. You know Rose Bolton's son. Father looked over at Raider, who was looking at Daenerys with wide eyes. Oh, he knew of the Boltons. All right. Not that Bolton, but he'd heard of the older one. I am not saying that it will be easy, Father said softly. I am not saying that there won't be a lot of difficulties in places, and I will say that the wildlings, free folk as they are, will need to swear to stop the raids at once and settle down in the gift for as long as the coming long winter lasts. No raids, Raider. No trouble. I cannot promise anything, but I will do my best, Raider said with a solemn nod. The chiefs of the free folk know what awaits us if we stay north of the wall. Can't you just command them? Then asked with a frown. You are supposed to be the king beyond the wall. The wildling who had once been of the Night's Watch looked Theon up and down. It's not that easy, lad, he said eventually. I am not, king as you might know it. I lead because I am the only one with a plan to save our people from the others. And once you've seen your first White Walker and felt that chill as they approach, then you'll understand why they follow me. Much to Robb's surprise, Theon did not bristle when he heard the word lad. Instead, he frowned in thought before nodding. Father looked around the room. Much still needs to be discussed, so I will not keep you. Grayton, please stay. We need to discuss matters with Raider. Robb and the others nodded and then walked to the door. Opening it, Robb caught Maester Luwin in mid-knock, and the older man jerked back in surprise. Ah, your pardon, Robb. Is Lord Stark free? Come in, Luwin. What is it? Luwin bustled in with what looked like a message. A raven from Storm's End, Lord Stark. Robb felt his ears prick, and he turned back into the room. From Renly Baratheon? He asked the question at the same time as his father did. Luwin's eyes swiveled slightly, and then twinkled a little with amusement before he sobered. No, my lord. From His Grace King Robert. Robb looked at father with a frown. What's he doing at Storm's End? Father grasped the message and read it quickly. When he looked up, he seemed nonplussed. And then he looked at it again. His Grace King Robert Baratheon, King of the Andals and of the First Men, etc., etc. Ned, I write in haste, as I must catch the tide back to King's Landing. I came here on a whim and I found something long hidden. Stormbreaker has been found again. Ned, a war is coming. I need your counsel. I will write again from King's Landing. And I am sending my bastard son Edric north to foster with you. Take care of the lad. He is young, but I am proud of him. Be well, my friend, Robert. He raised both eyebrows. Life was definitely turning from the previous path. And then he wondered how Mother was going to take the arrival of King Robert's bastard son. This would be something to watch. Jon Arryn. Gods. But he felt every one of his years today. He paused for a moment and then looked about the Red Keep. He was starting to realize just how much he hated this place. And yet he had to do his duty, because there was no one else available. Sighing, he strode down the stairs to the cells, doing his best to hide how weary he felt. Oh, he was tired. Lysa had reacted to the news of Baelish's arrest, with first shock and then an almost insane anger that had led to a tearful tirade that he was ruining her life by destroying, and then she'd broken off into incoherent mumbling and screeching and pulling at her hair. He'd had to call Pycelle in, who had promptly dosed her with some concoction that had left her gray-faced and asleep. At some point he'd have to question her about Robert's medicine. He wasn't looking forwards to that. He was starting to suspect that the balance of her mind was gone. Hearing the sound of low voices ahead, he peered down the corridor. Bronn was talking to Quill, and as he approached they both turned and bowed to him. He acknowledged their respect and then jerked ahead at the cells. "He is secure then?" Quill looked at Bronn, who nodded curtly. "He is, my Lord Hand. We cleared the others out of the cells around him, and we've been making sure that the guards don't go near him too often." "Oh? Why so?" "Lord Baelish has been trying to bribe them with large sums of coin that he doesn't actually have," Bronn said dryly. "We've had to remind people about that point." "He keeps trying, though, my lord," Quill said in an equally dry tone. "And he's mentioned that he can call on gold from Pentos." "The man's a thieving magpie," Jon said with a frown. "I wonder what else he's got hidden away in places." "Very well. Quill, please go back to the Tower of the Hand and arrange to have a raven sent to Pentos." The man nodded tersely, and then moved off down the corridor. Jon watched him go, and then looked back at Bronn. The sellsword looked as serious as he ever had to his knowledge. "My Lord Hand, I need a word with you." "On what matter?"
Baelish.
The sellsword sighed and then glared at the door to the cells. "When is his trial?" "A good question," Jon muttered. "Tomorrow. We have enough evidence to have him executed a dozen times over. The Iron Bank wants him dead as well." Bronn stared at him in shock. He crossed the Iron Bank. He, apparently lied to the Iron Bank, and diverted part of one of their loans, which makes him either more stupid than he appears to be, or more arrogant to think that he could get away with it. That said, he was the master of coin and had access to all the records he could alter. The real books in his possession were quite specific, however, and the Iron Bank's representative here in King's Landing was most annoyed. He sent a raven to Braavos, and I have little doubt that when a response comes, it'll be to demand Baelish's head. If, that is, there isn't another message heading to a faceless man somewhere in the area. Bronn's eyes widened, and then they hardened. That should solve a few things, then. Lord Aaron, that man's a weasel. Worse, he's a weasel with a long memory for grudges. Given that I'm the one who captured him, I won't rest easy until he's dead, because he'll want to settle accounts with me someday. What kind of grudges? The sellsword sighed a little. "I talk to the small folk, my lord. You'd be surprised what they know at times. People notice things around them, things that lords and ladies might ignore. Did you know that Baelish smirks a little whenever he passes the spot where Brandon Stark died in the throne room? He still remembers the man who wounded him, and he still smirks at the thought of the way he died, and Brandon Stark died a horrible death." Jon thought of all the tales he had heard of that terrible day in the throne room. The day that Ned's father and brother had both died, and in the doing had broken the realm by finally proving that Aerys Targaryen was insane, beyond words. And Baelish smirks. Still, when he thinks that people aren't watching him, Bronn shook his head. No, to call him a weasel is to be cruel to weasels. Man's a devious little shit, and frankly, my Lord Hand, the world will be a better place once Baelish is removed from it. Jon nodded shortly. "Keep a close eye out then, Bronn. You will be well rewarded for it." He paused. "May I ask what your fondest ambition is in life?" Bronn tilted his head and looked at him, obviously assessing his answer. "My own land," he said eventually, his voice wistful. "A small place, perhaps a title. A wife, a son, and no more sleeping in shithole taverns, and risking my life." Then he smiled bitterly. "Problem with that, of course, is that I tend to find trouble around every corner." Jon smiled back. "You should try being Hand of the King," he replied in tones as dry as Dornish stone, and then chuckled at Bronn's exaggerated shudder. "It might be that I can help you with your own plot of land. A city filled with gold cloaks, and my own men all searching for Baelish. Yet you were the one to find him in a place that no one thought to look, and you found his books. Yes, you'll be well rewarded. Bronn nodded respectfully at him, and then when Jon turned to the door, he reached out and opened it. Good luck against that one, my lord. He nodded back and then walked through the door, and grasped a torch from the wall next to the entrance. If I need you, I'll call. The other cells were all empty. There had been 2 people in them, a thief who had thought that the Red Keep offered richer pickings than the city, and a madman who claimed that the 7 hells were about to open, and then everyone was about to die, hence his need to get to the Iron Throne and then declaim from it. He'd been grabbed before he'd gotten anywhere near the main gates. Both were now in other cells. Petyr Baelish deserved to be alone. The man was also too damn dangerous to have others near him. Alone, that is, apart from the smell. It was a presence all of its own. It spoke of rot, of death, and excrement. It was a smell that did not waft. It assaulted the nose. Baelish heard him coming, because he was on his feet by the time that Jon approached the door to his cell and peered through the barred hatch. My lord hand, welcome to my new abode. Baelish spread his hands to gesture at the expanse of the cell around him, as if he was welcoming him to some sumptuous new quarters. He looked terrible, dressed in rough clothing and with a bruise to the side of his head, but his eyes were still sharp. What do I owe the pleasure of your company to? He looked the man up and down for a long moment, repressing the need to pull out his sword, and then finish the job that Brandon Stark had begun. Your trial will be tomorrow. On what possible charges? Have I not been a loyal subject of good King Robert? Baelish sounded wounded and almost exaggeratedly offended. You stole the king's coin. You lied to all and sundry. You bought properties in this city, and many others, with your ill-gotten gains, and you betrayed me, and that, Jon said between gritted teeth as he glared through the bars, is just the beginning of it. You tried to have my son kidnapped, Baelish. I will not forget that easily. You wound me, my lord. Baelish said the words so lightly, as if he was indeed innocent. And the proof for all this? Jon narrowed his eyes and then studied the wretched little man. We have your books, obviously planted by my enemies. Written in your hand? My enemies have many resources, which obviously include forgers. And presumably people who look just like you. We have uncovered your network. Ah, there it was. The slight uncertainty in the eyes, the quick lick of the lips. He was uncertain. Network? From your books, Jon said with a smile and with hate in his heart. You should have chosen a better cipher for them. My man cracked them on the 3rd try. We know exactly what you owned here in King's Landing. And of course, elsewhere. You don't seem to have inspired much loyalty from your people. Once they knew that your supply of money was denied to them, they talked. And such people! He finally had what he needed to send Janos Bloody Slint to the wall on charges of bribery, corruption, and a host of other things. But these people are nothing more but liars, my lord hand, debasing my good name. Your name, Jon said with a smile. What name? That of a thief and a scoundrel. A man who owns whorehouses, and who gets his whores from some very interesting places. A man who bribes gold cloaks to look the other way again, and again. Well, no more. Your filthy little network is no more. The Baelish was staring at him now, staring at him as if he wasn't sure what he was. Time to push one more knife in. And we have the man you sent to kidnap my son. Nikon, by name. And why, Baelish said with a slight start, as if he was forcing himself into action. Would I do that? I don't know, Jon admitted. Why would you? And why was it that my wife was so agitated when I sent young Robert away to Winterfell, but then calmed down after you talked to her? Did you tell her that you planned to snatch my boy? Did you whoreson? Baelish looked at him for a long moment, and then he actually smirked for an instant. Can I be faulted for wishing to reunite a devoted mother with her only child? Jon narrowed his eyes. Don't lie to me, Baelish. You sent your man to try and get my son on the day that I sent him north. How did you know? This time the smirk was an open and wide one. Why, my lord hand, how very naive of you. This is King's Landing. Everyone can be bought here, for the right price, of course. And you'd be surprised what you could find out. Some of the secrets out there are deliciously surprising. A faint warning bell rang at the back of his mind, and he looked at the wretched little man again. Why did you poison my son? Something flickered in the eyes of Baelish. Poison? The medicine that my son had for his so-called shaking sickness. No medicine at all. A slow poison that made him shake more. Where did Lysa get it from? Why, my lord hand, if you do not know, then...
It was you, wasn't it?
I know my wife. I know how she dotes on him. I know how she likes to nurse him. Did you recommend the apothecary to have a hold on her? This time the emotion behind the eyes of the other man was more clear. Surprise and a little fear. Lady Arryn wanted me to recommend an apothecary. I did so. Jon stared at Baelish, who stared back defiantly. There was something about him, something defiant, something almost jubilant, as if Baelish knew something that he did not. As I said, your trial will be in the morning, he said eventually. So I suggest you try and prepare what little defense you have. Oh, and you are no longer lord of the smallest of the fingers. You are attainted. You are a lord no more. This widened Baelish's eyes, and he took a step forwards with a hiss of hatred. You cannot. I can. You forget who you are taking to. Baelish, I am not just Hand of the King, but also Warden of the East, and Lord Paramount of the Vale. I do not take kindly to being betrayed by one of my bannermen, even from such a pitifully small holdfast. What kind of message would it send if you still had your title at your trial? Baelish's mouth worked for a moment, and then quick look of cunning came over him. Such a petty revenge. And I wonder what might slip out of my mouth as a consequence during my trial. Yes, I thought that you might play that card. I would advise against it. Why? What if I mention the king's great matter? Shock roiled through him, and he stared for a moment at a suddenly openly smirking Baelish. What do you know about that matter? Ha! Baelish wagged a finger at him. Why, everything, my lord Hand. It was so amusing and pitiful to see you and Stannis Baratheon trying to make your way through the street of King's Landing as you visited King Robert's bastard children. All so black of hair, I note, and blue of eye. How odd that the king's children look nothing like him. How stupid of you all to not see what I saw the moment I laid eyes on them. They are pure Lannister, every one of them. There was a gloating note to his voice, and Jon thought very fast and very hard. Very well. Littlefinger knew. Damn his heart. That was why he was so cheerful. That was why he looked so undefeated. Very well. Time to strike back. You will not mention the king's great matter at your trial, he said flatly. Not if you wish to live to attend it. Baelish smirked slightly again. Why, my lord Hand? Is that a threat? Against a prisoner of the most noble lord of the Vale? We have your secret records. We have deciphered everything. You look doubtful, but we have even ascertained how you diverted money from the Iron Bank's loan to the king into your purse. And we have informed a representative of the Iron Bank who happened to be here in King's Landing. He was displeased. There was just enough light to see the blood drain from the face of Petyr Baelish. What? Now it was Jon's turn to smile. I believe that you heard my words correctly. The Iron Bank is, or soon will be, depending on how fast that raven gets there and back, most displeased with you. Whatever made you think that divert those funds and not be eventually found out? Ah, such arrogance, Baelish. For Baelish lunged suddenly for the bars and gripped them, his knuckles almost as white as his face. You old fool, don't you know what you've done? The Iron Bank doesn't have people passing through somewhere like King's Landing on a whim. Like as not their man here has a faceless man somewhere nearby, or knows where one is. Jon smiled a small, chill smile. I know. There was a long pause as Baelish searched his face with wide and hunted eyes. After a long moment, he stepped back from the door, his face ashen and suddenly drawn. Oh, well played, Arryn. Well played. Let me guess, you have me guarded by that bright cell sword of yours. And if I agree not to mention your Lannister problem, I might just see another dawn, and indeed, my trial without dying a horrible death, thanks to a faceless man. I would take your word for it, but I know that to be worthless. So let me tell you this. I will see you tried fairly. I will even allow a trial by combat at the end of it. But one word, one solitary word, about the king's great matter, and I will have you gagged by your guard, and then left on your own in a cell by the quarters occupied by the Iron Bank's man. Baelish nodded slightly. You have already decided on my guilt. Your guilt is undeniable, Jon replied in a voice like stone. But you will have your trial. And then he turned and made his way back out, eventually reaching the door, where Bronn still was. The sellsword was sitting by the entrance, a pair of pliers in one hand and what appeared to be some nails in the other. He was twisting one against the other to make caltrops. Bronn looked up with a grim smile. Oh hey, if I'm to keep yon weasel alive against a possible faceless man, then I'll need every advantage I can get in guarding him. A good notion. Jon sighed tiredly. Keep him alive to see his trial. I would give you his holdfast and title as a reward for it, but the smallest of the fingers of the veil is somewhat barren, apart from a crop of rock. My thanks, my lord hand, but 'tis also somewhat remote. Bronn grinned as he continued to fashion caltrops, although it is tempting. I will see you rewarded, Bronn. Land and title. Just keep yon weasel alive. The sellsword nodded sharply. I shall, my lord hand. Jin nodded at him before striding out. The sun was shining, and after the darkness of the black cells, the contrast made his head hurt, for a long moment, and then he saw Quill hurrying towards him. Quill, what news? His Grace the King is returning, my lord hand, and the High Septon wishes to see you as soon as possible, at the Great Sept of Baelor. He says that it is very urgent,